What's up team, Coach Dre here. Right now we're going to talk about some hip dominant movements. So hip dominant movements stem from the movement of your hip hinge. So your hips go back and out and forward, in and out of extension and flexion. So when we think about our hip load, starting from the top, we have a good morning. So we typically do this for a warm-up movement, but it can also be tied into your strength. So that same movement, like your deadlift, all of this ties back to this hip dominant portion. So we load our hips and we stand back up. Now you might be wondering why I have a band on. So when we find our stance, it's usually your feet pointing forward, feet are right underneath my hips. Anything wider, you're looking at more of like a sumo stance and probably more of a squat stance. So you want to think about your toes pointing forward, and then my feet are anchored into the floor. So I do this corkscrew motion where my feet stay planted, but I kind of push my knees apart against that imaginary band, or if I have a band on, a real band. So it's a light band we want to keep here. We don't want to do anything too heavy because that will pull our knee in, okay? So if you've ever had like an ACL tear or a knee injury of some sort, it's probably because your glutes haven't been turned on and you didn't have that proper engagement with your knees. We always talk about that kinetic chain, right? So that's where this kind of ties into. So a kink in the chain could have caused that knee injury, that knee cape there. So we turn our hips on by activating with a band. Now, if you've built up to this mechanic, you don't need the band, but it's always really helpful to gear into that. So starting our hinge pattern off with that good morning, we find that bend over stance. And as I bend back, that's where that band comes in. So I push my knees out against that band and stand up. So that good morning is our first hip hinge movement. And then we have something like our Romanian deadlift. Your Romanian deadlift, your hinge pattern is a little more straight leg. So I'm gonna bend, stretch my hamstrings out, and stand up. Keeping that core turned on, keeping my lats turned on, inhale down, exhale up. When I come to something like more of a deadlift, my stance doesn't change, but my dumbbells are gonna go all the way to the floor. So I find my hip hinge, and then I drop my hips and allow my knees to come forward a little bit, but still a hip dominant movement to allow my dumbbells to come all the way to the floor and stand up. So let's see that difference. Hip hinge in your Romanian deadlift, straight leg, to your conventional, knees bend a little bit. Then we have our glute bridge. That's another hip dominant movement. So I find a nice tight fist in the floor, nice tight core. I bridge my hips up. Inhale down, exhale, shoot my hips up. Nice squeeze here. And that is typically the same position you would be in if you were standing up doing that hip hinge pattern. Inhale down, exhale up. Same thing, pushing my knees out against that band and keeping my hips turned on that whole time. When we start to build skill and we nail that down, we can move to our power movements.